In the 2021 playoffs, the Atlanta Hawks shocked the world. After handily beating the higher-seeded New York Knicks in the first round, they matched up with the first-seeded Philadelphia 76ers in the second round. The Hawks got great production from up and down their roster, and in Game 7, the infamous play occurred.
Simmons, they cleared out for him. Tapping his way in. Spins on Gallinari. Gives it up. Oh, he was right there. And a foul as Thibault goes to the basket.
That play was a huge momentum shifter in a game the Hawks would eventually win. This play had huge repercussions on the 76ers, which deserves a video in its own, but for the sake of this video, it sent the Hawks to the Eastern Conference Finals. This team was fun to watch. Trey put up big numbers despite subpar efficiency, and the team got double-digit scoring from 6 of their players, including double-doubles from both John Collins and Clint Capella. The Hawks would put up a decent fight against the eventual champion Milwaukee Bucks, in part because Giannis missed 2 games, but you can also say that Trae Young missed 2 games, and the Hawks would end up falling in 6. Bogdan Bogdanovic and Kevin Huerter struggled massively in that series, and while Trae's numbers looked good on paper, especially with his 48 points and 11 assist performance in Game 1, he had 24 turnovers to 27 assists in the series overall. Still, things were looking up in Atlanta after the 2021 season. This was a relatively young team that just made it to the conference finals. But fast forwarding to today, many analysts and fans now think of the Hawks as a team on a downwards trajectory. So what happened, and what does Atlanta do from here? Let's discuss. In the 2021 offseason, the Hawks decided to keep their team pretty much as it was, and most people were okay with that. They gave Trae Young his 5-year max extension, which ended up translating to $207 million because he made an All-NBA team in 2022. They extended Clint Capella for the 2023 and 24 NBA seasons for a total of $45 million, which was hefty but not egregious. And they traded for a reliable backup point guard in DeLon Wright for some belly button lint and a 2023 second rounder. I even liked their selection in the NBA draft. With the 20th pick, they selected Jalen Johnson, who's a physical specimen with the ability to handle the ball and run in transition. But the move in this offseason that was met with some criticism was re-signing John Collins to a massive 5-year, $125 million contract. Collins was thrown around in some trade offers in 2020 and 2021, and even publicly expressed concern with how Lloyd Pierce and Trae Young were running the offense. He said that the team should limit all those early shot clock attempts, and he also said the Hawks should look to get him more involved and emphasize ball movement and offensive flow, which was probably a shot at Trae Young. Combining his 100-plus games from the 2020 and 2021 season, his per-game averages were about 19.5 points, 8.5 rebounds, and over a block a game, while shooting 40% from 3. Those numbers are pretty darn good, and based on the market, a guy with those stats will get a lot of money coming off a rookie contract. You could argue his stats were better than, say, RJ Barrett, who got a 4-year, $107 million contract in the 2022 offseason. Regardless of that, for the 2022 season, the Hawks are bringing back pretty much their whole team. Trae Young, John Collins, Bogdanovic, Huerter, DeAndre Hunter, Clint Capella, Gallinari, and Onyeka Okongwu, while also adding DeLon Wright and Jalen Johnson. This team now had some real playoff experience, and their only important rotation player over 30 was Danilo Gallinari. Hopes were high to make a deep run with head coach Nate McMillan, who'd led them through the 2021 playoffs. However, 2022 was riddled with issues for the Atlanta Hawks. The virus still caused many players and coaches on the team to miss significant time. By most metrics I can find, the Hawks were one of the most affected teams in the NBA. But that's not an excuse for all their struggles. The team was just annoyingly inconsistent. They would lose 6 games in a row and then they'd win 7 in a row. You'd think the Hawks had figured it out, but then they'd go ice cold again. It was really hard to determine the true identity of this team. Were they good or were they not? They were as low as 17-25 at one point of the season, and they were under 500 at the All-Star break. But things did get better. They would get on a hot streak after the All-Star break, finishing the season on a 26-14 streak, and this would get them to a final record of 43-39, which was good for the East's 9 seed. With the new play-in tournament, this meant that they had a chance to qualify for the playoffs. Throughout the season, the Hawks were a fantastic offensive team, finishing with the second highest offensive rating in the entire NBA. It makes sense as their star player and the leader of their heliocentric offense, Trae Young, had an amazing year. He led the league in total points and total assists. He averaged about 28 and 10 on 46, 38, 90 splits. I'm not particularly a Trae Young fan. If anything, I'd have to say that I lean to the side of a Trae Young hater. But even I have to admit, to be a high usage guy with those splits is pretty amazing, even with his extreme defensive liabilities. I am a New York Knicks fan, so there is that. I am biased. But I've never liked the short guards who don't try on defense and they get moody when they're not hitting their shots or getting touches. It makes them only effective when they're hitting shots and they have the ball. But relating to defense, that was definitely one of their main issues this season. In terms of defensive rating, the Hawks were 26th in the NBA. They looked incompetent and discombobulated almost every time they were on defense, in my opinion. And if their offense wasn't in full stride, as it was at times for the Hawks, that's a recipe for disaster. This is the reason why the Hawks lost a lot of games to subpar competition in 2022. Their first game was against the 10-seeded Hornets, and the Hornets tried to go small against them, but Clint Capella dominated the boards and the paint, and Trae Young had a good, albeit inefficient game. They did this without John Collins too. In fact, he'd been inactive since March 13th, and the Hawks finished the season 12-5. Against the Cavs in their second play-in game, they just squeaked by with a fantastic Trae Young performance, and some help from Bogdan Bogdanovic. The young Cavaliers team struggled to hit their decent looks, just like they did against the Knicks in the 2023 playoffs, and the Hawks were able to secure the 8th seed despite their up-and-down season. The Heat were the 1 seed, and they were definitely favored going in, but they were far from an invincible team. But we all know what happened on that series. The Hawks just didn't really compete with the Heat. Game 1 was abysmal. Trae Young had 8 points on 1 made field goal and 6 turnovers to just 4 assists. It seems like the Heat just always make star players struggle against them come playoff time, and this was the case the entire series as Jimmy Butler dominated Trae Young. Jimmy Butler was the best player in the series. Trae Young averaged just 15 points, 6 assists, and over 6 turnovers per game in that series. He had 2 games where he did not even crack double-digit points. Many attributed the series loss mostly to the Heat's defense, but also to the fact that the Hawks didn't have any other primary ball handlers. The Heat put a lot of pressure on Trae Young, trying to force the ball out of his hands, and sometimes into the hands of Heat players, and then scramble back to the other players who were less confident off the dribble. This strategy definitely worked wonders for the Heat. So after a disappointing first-round exit and another season in the bottom 10 in defensive rating, the Hawks front office had to think on how to improve this team. Was that 2021 season, dare I say, a fluke? The GM appeared to think so. He literally said midway through the 2022 season, maybe I need to lower my expectations for this team. I have to accept that responsibility that maybe it wasn't such a great idea to bring everybody back. That's on me. Not exactly a glowing review from your GM, but it definitely seemed that a big move would happen that ensuing offseason to correct the course of this team, right? There'd been some rumors about a Dejounte Murray trade in the previous season, but those talks never really picked up steam. That is until the early summer of 2022. Dejounte was a really solid player on the Spurs, averaging 21.1 points, 8.3 rebounds, 9.2 assists, and 2 steals per game. But at times it just didn't feel like things were working between Dejounte and the San Antonio Spurs. Many fans rationalized that if a team like the Hawks traded for Dejounte Murray, they could get some much needed help on defense. It appears as if the Hawks agreed with this sentiment, and so on June 30th, 2022, the Hawks made a blockbuster trade with the Spurs. They sent unprotected firsts in 2025 and 2027, a pick swap in 2026, a lottery-protected first from Charlotte in between 2023 and 2025, and Danilo Gallinari for Dejounte Murray and Jock Landale. Landale and Gallinari were subsequently waived. But some were definitely more skeptical of the fit. Everyone knew it would probably be a better fit than Gobert on the Timberwolves, a video about that coming soon. But still, this package was a decent amount of value for another guard when they already had Trae. But the trade did seem to resolve some of Atlanta's largest issues, giving them another primary ball handler and desperately needed help on the defensive end. This would not be the only trade Atlanta made this offseason though. Atlanta shipped Kevin Huerter to the Kings for Justin Holiday, Mo Harkless, and a protected 2024 first. This wasn't a great haul, this wasn't even a good haul for an amazing shooter, but the stingy Atlanta owners refused to pay the luxury tax to keep him, which seemed weird. Why would you make a clear win-now move in acquiring Dejounte, yet be stingy on building a core around them? Another move I wasn't a fan of was letting DeLon Wright walk. It's not like he's a star player or anything, but I liked his defense and high IQ off the bench, and I think he could have fit next to either Dejounte or Trae in spurts of a game. Finally, the Hawks drafted AJ Griffin, another Duke wing. With the roster now mostly set, how would this team do in the 2023 season? At the start of the season, it seemed like nothing changed. They would string together some impressive wins against Milwaukee, Philly, and Denver, mixed with some unimpressive losses to the hands of Charlotte, Houston, and Orlando. On January 21st, they dropped what should have been a gimme against Charlotte to drop to 24-23 on the year. From this point onwards, they would stay within one game of 500. Yes, one game of 500 until April 5th. A whopping 33-game stretch with no more than a 2-game winning streak or a 2-game losing streak. Atlanta reeked of mediocrity. In the middle of this stretch of mediocrity, the Hawks also fired a coach once again, Nate McMillan this time. At the time, the coach had reportedly clashed with Trae Young, and Atlanta's front office had to side with their moody star. They didn't really have a choice with how much power players have in today's NBA. To replace Nate McMillan, Atlanta turned to a respected coach in NBA circles, Quinn Snyder. Would that help them get out of this funk? They'd finished the season 41-41, perfectly mid. Truly an homage to their season and team as a whole. Their offense was still good. They had an offensive rating of 116.6, which was good for 7th in the league, but this was a downgrade from previous years. Trae Young was okay, averaging 26 and 10, but on bad efficiency. He still has a lot of gravity to pressure a defense, but he too often settled for bad long-range threes, and that showed in his 33.5 three-point percentage. He's a way better shooter than that. Dejounte's numbers took a slight decline, but that was to be expected as he was sharing duties with Trae in the backcourt now. He averaged 20.5 points, 5.3 rebounds, 6.1 assists, and 1.5 steals, but his transition to Atlanta was not ideal. When Trae was isolating, teams would still put a lot of pressure on him, and oftentimes he'd kick the ball out to Dejounte. Dejounte was expected to take a leap as a shooter in the high-octane Atlanta offense, but this just didn't really happen. He shot 34% from deep, and only 31.6% in crunch time. No bueno. Dejounte's capable to go off the dribble or make another pass, but they lost their best standstill shooter in Kevon Huerter, and their other players left a lot to be desired off the dribble. Dejounte Murray also played a decent amount of iso ball in the 2022-23 season, which caused problems. Dejounte's not a bad guy in isolation per se, but that wasn't what was causing issues. Anytime he was isolating, Trae Young would just chill off ball with no desire to get involved in the play. In essence, this resulted in a dynamic where the Hawks were either getting the skill set of Trae or Dejounte Murray on offense, not both. Only very rarely were the two combining their abilities. But what about defense? Wasn't that supposed to be improved? They went from 26th to 22nd, so that's an improvement, I guess. Dejounte Murray was obviously the big addition to this defense, but I see Dejounte more as an opportunity defender rather than an elite on-ball defender. He's in passing lanes a lot, but that's high reward, high risk. So overall, opponents shot above their expected value when defended by Dejounte Murray. And Trae was still a huge liability. Dejounte, like I said, he's not an elite on-ball defender, but he's a good defender. But if a team forced Dejounte to switch onto a guy in the corner, Trae would still be alone on an island, and he would get cooked like some barbecue chicken. The positive side on the defensive end was their big men, their centers specifically. I'm not going to bore you with D-Raptor and rim deterrence in this video, but in simple terms, both Clint Capella and Onyeka Okongwu forced opponents to shoot lower than their expected field goal percentage at the rim by 6% and 4% respectively. Okongwu was much more versatile on the perimeter though, even being an average defender out there compared to the rest of the NBA. Actually though, let's start talking about that supporting cast, starting with Clint Capella. Capella as a player is an elite rebounder and great defender, but struggled with some minor injuries over the season and missed 17 games. He's limited on offense, but I would say he's definitely a positive player on the court for them overall. Next is DeAndre Hunter, who's a positive defender with a 35% three-point percentage. You may be saying, what's wrong with that? The Hawks needed defense. Well, when he was on the floor, the offense got worse. Trust me, I like DeAndre Hunter as a player, but he's objectively not a good dribbler, passer, or rebounder. So if the initial defender closed out on him, he would have to make a decision to shoot a contested three, make a tough pass, or drive into traffic, where none of those things are exactly his strong suit. Bogdan Bogdanović is exactly what you'd expect, 14 points per game, 40% shooting from three, and coming off the bench in 45 of his 54 games. I like the pair of Duke wings for the future, but they just weren't quite ready to be good contributors this season. And I also like the Saddiq Bey trade if they plan on re-signing him after next season. He's a quality backup and a serviceable starter. John Collins was definitely the other big issue on the Hawks. He averaged just 13 points and 6.5 rebounds per game, shooting a career worst 50% from the field and 29% from three. That's like Russell Westbrook numbers. The Hawks have Kyle Korver as an assistant, yet Collins is still having trouble shooting. I think there's something wrong with his finger, but I don't really know. To be honest, he just looks disinterested, and according to John Collins, in dire need of a bigger role. He called the Hawks season a soap opera. Clearly, he didn't want to be there. And so I would say the John Collins trade came out of nowhere because there weren't really rumors about it this season, but he'd been in trade rumors for like 3 years, and it was obviously it was time for him to go, especially since he was coming off the worst season of his career. But the return they got for him was terrible. You do have to keep in mind this is a guy who recently averaged almost 20 and 10 in a season, and you traded him for Rudy Gay and a second-round pick. And then in an even worse trade, they sent Rudy Gay, Ty Washington, and Usman Garuba to the OKC Thunder for Patty Mills. They also sent a second-round pick in that trade too. They gave up a second-round pick to get Patty Mills. I get that the first move was a cost-saving move. This was a mid-team last season, and I think they're going to continue to be that. And that move got the Hawks under the luxury tax. But the second move, Ty and Garuba are not players I just give up on. Ty hasn't had much PT in the NBA, but in his limited stint in the G League, he was dominant. He averaged like 27 points per game. And Usman Garuba has shown the ability to be a great rebounder and has some potential to stretch the floor at the power forward position. Patty Mills is a nice backup guard for this team, a great shooter, if he even stays, but come on guys, I did not like that series of trades. Still, I would not be surprised if the Hawks are not done making moves. I think that Clint Capella and or Bogdan Bogdanovic are definite trade candidates. They're making $20.6 and $18.7 million respectively next season. Especially, I think Clint Capella is a trade candidate because of Onyeka Okongwu. He's extension eligible now, and he's shown significant promise as a young big. You don't want to pull a Minnesota Timberwolves and pay a bunch of money to your center core. Trae Young has also been in the news as a potential trade candidate. The Hawks had another disappointing exit, and the front office was given the green light from owners to do whatever it wants, including considering Trae Young trades. Several reports surfaced this season about a divide between Trae and Nate McMillan, but what people seem to overlook is that Trae had reported feuds with other Hawks players and staffers too. It's still to be seen how the relationship Trae has with Quinn Snyder and how it evolves, but he does not have the best reputation with relationships with coaches. At the end of the day though, I'd be shocked if Trae Young was traded before the beginning of the upcoming season. The Hawks have invested too much in this backcourt of Trae and Dejounte to give up after just one season. He is still an all-NBA level player despite his flaws, and I don't really see many teams having the assets to trade for a guy like Trae. Also, with the fact that the Hawks just signed Dejounte Murray to a 4-year, $120 million extension, it makes it pretty clear to me that they're going to at least try to run this back a few more times. If the Hawks are extremely underwhelming to start the 2024 NBA season though, I wouldn't rule out a Trae Young trade, but I imagine it's a last resort for Hawks management, which would be a signal that they're blowing up this team. But what do you guys think? How do you think the Hawks will do next season? Do you think Trae Young will be traded by the start of the 2024-25 season? This next season is pivotal for the short-term and long-term future of Atlanta. The team's at an inflection point right now with the roster, and things could go many ways. Only time will tell what happens. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe for weekly basketball and football content. That's it for now. Peace.